Hey everybody, what's going on? You're watching The Sit Down. I'm DJ Sixsmith. Yaron Weitzman's here with us. He's got his brand new book, Tank to the Top. What's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
Or
so
here,
last
or
time we
whatever.
talked, things are pretty different for the Sixers a year ago. They still had
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler. They had JJ Redick. And there was actually basketball still being played also, which is a little different.
I
So,
I
yeah,
was gonna say I
compare the
believe I
differences.
believe then I said I expect everyone to come back. So it seems
Yes.
like yeah, it's obvious I know nothing. It was very wrong. But no.
Well, at the time, it seemed like a pretty good prediction. Obviously, things
Yes.
went a little bit
Yes.
differently in free agency, and certainly an interesting time to be talking about the Sixers. So, why don't we go backwards first? What was it like diving into this whole thing and putting this book together about the process?
It was both fun and not fun. It was challenging. Like I mean, you know this, I'll give the background. Like the Sixers and Sam Hinkie neither really participated. So Sam Hinkie, he's an individual, and I kind of thought, I spoke to him a couple times on the phone, and he was very clear he had no interest. I thought, it's happened before with stories, and you think usually the guy breaks, for lack of a better term. Like usually they kind of give in, like, you reach their uncle and their cousin and their former kindergarten teacher, and all these things, and they keep hearing like, and okay, Hinkie, who maybe is won't surprise people, he's a different kind of guy. He did not. Um, the Sixers, on the other hand, so I got to give my caveats is like they let me show up for my day job. Like they never, for the most part, made a stink about taking away my credential for Bleach Report or anything. So that power to them. But when it came to like reporting on the book, they, no one was allowed to speak to me about it. And they would remind former employees about NDAs to remind them not to speak with me. So anyway, so that made it more difficult. It also creates sort of a challenge, which I enjoy. It's one of those things like looking back, it's like, okay, challenge accepted. And you kind of go about it a different way. And it probably made the book better because, you have like a timeline, you have a due date, and like you have to go digging in other places. If you just get everybody to speak to you for 4 hours, kind of easy to say you're done there. So yeah, it was a pain, but also, I really enjoyed it. I like it. The phrase "I like having written" really applies here. Like I
Mhm.
really enjoyed having written this book. I can't say I like sitting down and writing it all, but yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, totally understand that. I mean, you reveal a lot of really fascinating things. So, what was the thought process also in like telling some pre-process stuff? So it was like the Allen Iverson days and the Billy King days. Like, why was it important to start with that stuff initially?
I think like who was it? It was this guy Michael Levine, who's actually in the book. From shout out to Rights to Ricky Sanchez guys, but he kind of called it the book of context,
Mm.
which I think is a funny way to put it. And I just feel like it's all connected. Like you can't just drop in. It all matters, right? So to understand why the Sixers, why ownership, why some fans, why this whole group decided or had an appetite for this sort of rebuild. Like I think you have to understand how we got there, basically how could say boring, but I just think the best word is blah. Like just how
Mm.
blah everything was from 2000, I don't know, 2006 through 2011, whatever the actual years are, through 2012, where I call it purgatory. They kind of not good enough to compete, not bad enough to get a good draft pick, boring, no superstars. And then this, when I was doing the research, I just found it fascinating that like Billy King, the former GM, like he kind of considered the Iverson trade was sort of this real fork in the road moment where like they could have gone on a process like rebuild, we're going to tank, and they decided not to. And they won too many games and they missed out on drafting Kevin Durant or on the opportunity to draft Kevin Durant, and that kind of sets them on this path. And there's some symmetry there that I just found really interesting. And there was a lesson there too, right? Like the lesson was obvious as to why you can have issues with how Sam Hinkie went about things, which is why. I mean, the strategy is a good one. I don't really think there's an argument there. Like, in the NBA, they reward the strategy. That's the correct one to tank.
So, for somebody like you who spent, hours and weeks and months studying Sam Hinkie, I mean, you even
Yeah.
go as far as to have a conversation with the guy he tells to have breakfast with, like, and never actually has breakfast with the guy. So,
Yeah.
what is the most intriguing part about Sam Hinkie as the
Ah,
person and Sam Hinkie as the person running the Sixers for several years?
that's a great question. He is, so the phrase I've been using is like, I think he's unique. That word is usually misused. And like in the literal definition, one of a kind, like he is unique. Like if I just tell you, people know Sam Hinkie and you see like, you hear like the Silicon Valley talk and, he's living out there and those types. And yet he's from a small town in Oklahoma. Like those two things by itself, right? Like he's a former high school jock. I'm saying jock, that's not the right word, but this how about sports star, right? From a small town in Oklahoma. Like, I don't know how many high school sports stars from small towns in Oklahoma end up living in Silicon Valley and preaching Silicon Valley type ethos, right? That can't be a big group. So, yeah, that, like, he's both, like, the cliches, right? Like, some of the cliches are correct in terms he's a different kind of guy to talk to, and some of the things, I always refer to his article because, again, he spoke to him and I didn't. But, like, Sports Illustrated's Chris Ballard, and the profile on Hinkie a couple years after the process, after he was out. And I think that was, like, in terms of nailing Hinkie, he nailed it. Like, just the parts where, like, yeah, Hinkie does have those jock backgrounds, but, like, he's also, to Ballard, he says, we should really watch games backwards or something like that. Like, why don't we watch basketball games backwards? Because he thinks we're going to learn something new or something about, like, if you know context. I don't even know, to be honest. I'm not even sure. But, like, that's a strange thing to say, right? That kind of tells you a lot. So that part's true. Then the part that was interesting to me is one trauma. He has a trauma in his life, which is actually a theme in the book. A lot of these guys, right? So his older brother committed suicide when he was 10. Hinkie was about 17. Sorry, the opposite. Hinkie was 10. The brother was 17. It's a horrible story. And, like, I mean, I would love to have asked. I would, if we're sitting with him, I'd love to know how that informs you. I think, like, I don't see any way that can't influence how you go about your life. But he found solace in basketball. That, like, he tells a story on a different podcast about, like, a friend's dad taking him out to a court and then kind of shooting to pass the night. And just, I think, so again, it's all the Silicon Valley type stuff, the analytical type thinking and all that. But he also believes in sports. Like, he loves sports. He wanted to be in sports. Like, he, like, all the cliches, like, he believes, maybe not a cliche about, like, clutch genes, right? But in terms of, like, the power of sports, he believes in that. I think it's fair to say. So it's like, he's just hard to put in a box. Maybe that's the way I would phrase it best.
Well, he's just one of the many fascinating characters in this whole story. And for me, another one is Brett Brown. I think you did a great job in laying out his whole story. Even going back to San Antonio with the stories with Nick Van Axel and being a player development coach. Just amazing stories you dug up. So how do you feel coming out of this about Brett Brown? Because it's really easy to say, hey, like, he got screwed into this whole thing with the process. Or, you know what, he's a good coach, but he's not going to be the guy to take the Sixers to the next level. So what are the big prevailing thoughts you have about Brown?
That's a good one. Okay, one is he's had to deal with more, I'll call it, BS/shenanigans than any head coach. I don't know, ever. I'm making up.
You could say ever. Like, I mean, it's certainly possible, right?
The list of things from the process, right? Which was, again, teams have tanked before, but not this way, and to the noise that surrounded it, whether fair or not. It's the process in terms of Embiid and whatever, just all of Embiid and missing 2 years, and Joey Okafor stuff, and then we got weirder. We have Markelle Fultz, and then we get even weirder with Brian Colangelo and Bernard Gate, like, and Jimmy Butler. So, like, the cards he's been dealt, it's not easy. So I'm going to say that, and he's made it further. Like, the coaches who come in for the development stage, for the rebuilding stage, rarely make it out. Like, I always point to the Nets now, like Kenny Atkinson, like, that's the perfect comparison. Like, of the guy people liked, good culture, was doing a good job, and just people, so it was decided he's not the right guy for us. Again, fair or not, right? So that part, but I do think he's made mistakes, and especially early on, that I think have, like, hurt the franchise for long term, right? And like, I always go back to this, it's a discipline thing, and I always feel weird bringing this up because it's not like I believe in, like, a Bobby Knight style discipline where, throwing chairs or yelling, and it's not all fair to put on the coach, but, start with, like, Nerlens Noel was showing up late, they're holding team planes. And it's like, I kind of call it the original sin, right? That happens. And, like, Brett Brown and the Sixers would say, well, we fined him hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it wasn't like we were letting it happen. But yet something wasn't clicking. And I don't know what that is. It's an it factor. Maybe it's just all the players they brought in. Maybe it's because Sam Hinkie didn't have his back originally, and that made it harder. But just whatever it was, that was this a precedent was laid out at the beginning, and that Joel Embiid kind of followed that. And again, for good reasons, right? Joel Embiid, he gets to the league, and his brother's, again, horrifically killed, his 13-year-old brother. Like, his first couple weeks with the team or whatever, first couple months, back in Cameroon. He comes back, he's mourning and dealing with not playing. So yeah, obviously he's going to maybe not be the most well-behaved player, but again, whatever reason. So, like, those are good excuses, not even excuses. I don't want to call them that. Just, they explain the behavior and you understand why maybe he wasn't being so careful with his diet or things like that. But at a certain point, things just, like, it just became the way of the organization, that players were allowed to do whatever they wanted, and there was a lack of accountability, and that's kind of stayed ever since. And you see that culminates this year. It didn't make it in the book. I keep bringing it up. I wish it,
Mhm.
excuse me. I wish it had happened in time for the book. The quote about Ben Simmons wanting him to take a three, like,
Mhm.
Ben Simmons takes a three in a game, and the next day or that night at the press conference, Brett Brown says at the press conference, tell his agent, tell his brother, I want to see a three every game. And since then, Ben hasn't taken one. I just find that, like, the fact that he was willing to say that, it seems like, he's not stupid, Brett Brown. He knows that might backfire, what that's going to make look like. It's a gambit. I don't know what that, it just, to me, that's so telling of the whole situation. I think I kind of learned that. So there's maybe that Brett's a little non-confrontational, and that probably did not work well. Again, I'm not saying, like, you can't make NBA players run suicides, right? And some of it's on them. But just whatever it is, there was never, something didn't click early on.
Yeah, you can't go with the whole Jim Boylan approach and
Right,
just switch
exactly,
players in
exactly,
Chicago, right?
exactly. Or calling timeouts when you're down 20 to, like, play. Like, I'm not, like, that's the whole thing, right? It gets weird when you talk about this stuff because it's like, okay, you don't want that. Should we do this? No, but there's a middle ground, and it's hard to describe. It's like an it thing, and some of it is the players, right? Popovich is a famous quote, like, Timmy let me coach him, and that made the difference. So for sure. So maybe if Joel Embiid is more like Tim Duncan or Damian Lillard types, like, maybe that changes everything, and Brett can focus on
Yeah.
what he needs to and have a different voice.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a different locker room where guys are holding Nerlens Noel accountable for showing up late to the plane, like, it's a different story.
Exactly.
All these
Exactly.
young guys, and then it's like even the stuff you get into with, like, the whole Hinkie contract thing, where it's like second round picks, we're going to give them weird contracts. Like, what was the most
Yes.
processy thing about the Sixers? Like, what was
Ooh.
most unique to the Sixers throughout this entire thing that explains just how they ran their business?
That's a good question. I think it has to be Hinkie's, like, refusal to yield on anything, right? I think that was the difference. Like, so from, like you said, the second round pick stuff, the NBA is a small world. It's like a really small business. Like, I never got to look it up for the book. I probably should have. Like, what percentage of agents represent what percent? Like, I feel like half the league is represented by 5 people. To
Totally.
look it up,
Yeah, it's a
right?
really small group. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have that. You're dealing with the same people over and over, Aaron. And teams. You're dealing with teams. You only 29 other teams you could trade with. Only whatever teams you can do. So from that perspective, his, like, another GMs would tell me, or assistant GM, it's not, you can't try to kill on every single move here. It just doesn't work. You have to repeat. And, like, so there were those deals. The Andre Kirilenko deal is one I kind of bring up. So Andre Kirilenko was I'm gonna forget the exact details, what year, but he's on the Nets, and his wife, they're gonna trade him, and his wife is on bed rest. She's fine, but on bed rest, and they have 2 or 3. She's pregnant, and they have 2 or 3 other kids. And he gets traded to the Sixers, and he doesn't want to report. He wants to stay in Brooklyn. First of all, he doesn't want to play for a team that's like the Sixers that aren't trying. He's a veteran, so that's one. There's the part about his wife and being home. It's just he doesn't want to go. He wants to stay in Brooklyn, or at least go to a veteran. And after that's done, he figures he'll catch on the veteran team. Whether he's told that the Sixers agreed when they traded for him that they would release him. Whether that's true or not, Hinkie's and people around him would say that was not true, was not made clear to us. Maybe the Nets said that to cover their own asses. Who knows? But whatever it is, like, it became the reality, right? At some point, Sam Hinkie learns that this guy does not want to be here. There's a legitimate reason, right? And he'd love to be out. And Hinkie instead holds on to him because he wants to flip him for a second round pick. Because that's it. You don't want to trade him before the deadline. And they start fighting him eventually. And the idea is, well, at a certain point, you should report, which, yeah, black and white, right? You have a contract, you're professionals, you're paid to do that. But it just, it's like, mate, what's the best you're going to get is like a mid-second round pick. Like, is that worth it? Like, that's a great example to me where, let's turn off the purely analytical thinking. That's not even the right word. Just the purely black and white thinking. And I turn that off and just say, you know what? Even forget the human side of it, right? Which I think matters. Forget that. Just from even a business standpoint, I think doesn't make sense. Like, I think you benefit more from, like, people seeing, you know what? It's okay. We'll let him go. Like, I think that will benefit your bottom line more kind of going forward, and so that's the best example I can give.
Yeah, he kind of lacked that human emotion, and I think it's interesting between Hinkie and then, like, the really unique ownership structure for the Sixers also, because here are these VC guys that are willing to take these hits, to take these lumps. Why don't you just explain how the Sixers ownership landscape kind of fits into this whole picture in terms of what?
Yeah, it was interesting, right? Yeah, I didn't realize, right? So everyone, Hinkie, like, he's the guy, it was him, but I don't think I realized. I mean, some people did. Maybe this is me, but, like, it wasn't that he came to ownership with this idea, like, and they're like, oh, we've never heard such a thing. Like, let's do this. It was, the example I give is so if Hinkie's the architect, if you hire an architect to renovate your house, the architect's carrying out your vision, right? Like he's doing something that you're on board with. That's what happened here. That's what applied here, right? They come in, they kind of let the Sixers, they buy the team in 2011. They kind of let the Sixers for a really good price, like 450, I think was the number. And now it's $2 billion. They kind of let the Sixers and Doug Collins and the old school basketball types do their things. Business as usual. The buy-on trade happens, blows up. They realize, we need to kind of bring in some of that. And they're correct about all this stuff, right? They realize that they have plateaued and that they need to bring in some of the types of thinking that they would bring to their day jobs into the sports. Again, makes sense. The way these guys made their money is private equity. And, I'm sure somebody will tell me I had this wrong, but, if you dumb down private equity or oversimplify it, a lot of times basically what happens is you buy an asset that's kind of a troubled asset, you strip it down, and then you build it back up. So even like hearing someone explain that to me, I was like, oh, that sounds pretty familiar, right? That's kind of, that sounds right on board here. So they do that. Hinkie, they had actually interviewed Hinkie the year before they hired him. He kind of pitched them on where he thought they were going. He ended up being right. They brought him in and they decide, let's all embark on this together. So the idea that this is what they wanted. And that's, I think, part of the reason he felt so betrayed when they kind of pulled the rug out from under him, and why it scarred him. People ask, will he come back? And he thought ownership, he thought they were on the same page. He thought they saw things in a similar way. And in the end, he ended up being wrong about some of that, at least. And I think that definitely scarred him for sure.
What do you think is the big what if here? Because I could say Sam Hinkie continues his job. I could say Markelle Fultz doesn't explode in that whole situation. I could say the Kawhi Leonard shot doesn't go in. What is the big what if for you when you think about the Sixers?
That's a good one. It's funny, though. So the first two are usually the answer. The Kawhi Leonard shot, I've never thought about that. But that's interesting, right? Because, taking those first two, right? Maybe if they beat Toronto, maybe they won a championship last year, and, who cares that Markelle didn't work out or any of this stuff? It would be worth it. I still think you got to go back to the Hinkie, if Hinkie was allowed to see it through. I think that's, the starting point there, right? Yeah, it's a hard one, right? Because I'm thinking he wouldn't have made the Fultz trade, I don't think. But then again, it's easy to rip on Brian Colangelo. 98% of evaluators saw Fultz.
Everybody loved him. He would have been the perfect
except the Boston Celtics.
Missing right now.
And that's the part, right? Yeah, that's the part, right? He was the player that he was projected to be. Is the player, if you say, here's who Markelle Fultz is projected to be, and then now here's the kind of player the Sixers, the ideal type of player they need. Those two, that's the same guy. So you got to give him credit for that, I guess, right? So that again, it's what I'm saying. So if Hinkie's out, but if Fultz becomes that, then you have this incredible group. So maybe that's the answer. I don't have a good answer. I'm talking myself into all of them. Because if you have this incredible,
I could talk myself into anything.
Right, the Fultz one might be the answer, honestly, because you have those three. I think that sort of set them behind. They wasted a number one pick, and it kind of set them. They started chasing veterans, and I think it might have changed the clock a little bit. Where they don't. The Jimmy Butler trade was good. They didn't give up much for him. Tobias Harris trade was not great. But I don't think they make any of those types of deals. I'm just playing this out, right? If you have a young group like that who are all 24, 23, whatever, I don't think you're going after 30-year-olds, right? It's a whole different timeline. So that might be the real answer, that despite everything else. And even if you're a Hinkie supporter, you can't help, he messed up. He made some mistakes, right? It wasn't, you could disagree. And I think there are reasons you can easily disagree that he didn't deserve to be ousted, but they can also make the argument, no, this guy, he made a bunch of mistakes and there were some issues and they needed to change some things.
I think everything got sped up. Even thinking about when Redick comes in, they were supposed to be an 8 seed. That would have been a great thing. And then all of a sudden they win all those games at the end of the regular season. They beat the Heat. They're playing against the Celtics. Suddenly the timeline just completely transformed a lot quicker than everybody thought.
I always joke they skipped the Memphis Grizzlies stage that they're in now, that fun, young, plucky team that everyone, the league pass team that everyone loves. They skipped that. They went straight to, oh, we're a contender. And it's dangerous to do that.
And then I don't even know how you describe them now, because based on where we left off, things weren't in a great spot. With Embiid and Simmons both struggling with injuries, and who knows if we'll get basketball again, but what do you make of where the Sixers ended things? And if basketball does come back, what does Philadelphia look like?
I don't know. That's a good. I think as a basketball fan, I'm frustrated by the moves this summer. And to be fair, I thought they were pretty good, but clearly I was wrong and other people were wrong, and clearly the Sixers were wrong, right? Al Horford he's not a good fit. It doesn't work. And you need shooters, right? They haven't surrounded those two guys. You can argue about the Simmons and Embiid fit all you want, and it's rightfully so. And it's clearly like there's no arguing that they work well on the court together. You can argue it might not matter, that talent overcomes it, right? That's fair. But there's no debate. There's nobody who could say those two are a good match on the court. Like, there's just no way. But the only way to see how far they could go would be surround them with the proper players, and they just have not done that, right? Shooters or pick and roll creators, things like that. And as a basketball fan, I'm kind of frustrated. And as somebody who's devoted so much to this, like, I would love to see how, given the proper pieces around them, like how far can Simmons and Embiid go? Because everything else, despite it all, like they got those two guys, and those are the two guys, and you have those two guys, and like you have a shot. And yeah, I'm fascinated. I'm curious to see how they plan on going about fixing this, right? Like, I think they'll try to trade Al Horford. I'm not reporting that. It just seems like logic would dictate. Yeah, and like how they kind of go about their assets. Like they don't have any more picks. They don't have any more young players really that teams are craving for. They owe a lot of money to a lot of players. How are they going to address that? I'm not really sure. So to answer your question, like I think, yeah, I would expect. I don't think if the playoffs started now, they're not winning. They're not going to win 3 rounds in the East. They're going to beat the Celtics, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Celtics and the Heat. I mean, these are really good teams. The Raptors, not to mention the Bucks. Yeah, no, I don't know. I'm really curious. I'm curious. I guess the answer would be to your question would be they're going to have to make some sort of move or address the issues they've created and kind of worry more about fit and surround those two guys with the proper players.
I think the weird thing that I was thinking about reading your book is like, this is a team that potentially doesn't get out of the second round, just given their last 2 playoff appearances. And then if you go back to like those Doug Collins Sixers, like wasn't there the one year they made it to the second round, right? The Rose Bulls injury, like they would end up in the same
the Uncut Gems.
Yeah.
The Uncut Gems game. That's right. I think I know it would have been good if that movie came out before. That would have been great to refer to that, right? But that was the Uncut Gems. Yeah, they made it that far.
But just the fact that like both those teams would end up being in the same spot, like this version of Philly is so much more talented, and like to be in the same grouping just doesn't make sense to me. It's crazy.
It's funny.
Yeah.
No, it's funny. I hadn't thought about it right then. It is. It would be for the I'll name drop that 7 people listening, like for the Howard Eskin types here, like out there, like that would be they would love that if like at the end of this, Embiid never makes it further than like the Drew Holiday led Sixers did, and it would be, and it'd be it's It also shows how hard this all is, right? And that kind of, and why Hinkie's whole thing was, process over results, right? You could argue. And again, it is a results business. So I do think at a certain point, like, I agree, but no, results matter. But no, like, winning a championship is hard. You need a lot of things to break right for you.
I like that you had your little moment with Hinkie, even though it wasn't what you wanted. At least you got to chat with him for a little while at the end of this whole thing.
Yeah, it was the story about when I had and then eavesdropping on him while he was watching the Sixers game and hearing him ask a friend as MCW, is Michael Carter Williams still in the league? Yeah, no, that was happy. There are moments like, so it's funny. So the prologue and epilogue are the only 2 times they use first person, and they're both about Hinkie, and like both of those, I knew what they were. Like the second those things happen, so like I mean, I can summarize, like in the prologue is Hinkie's in his resignation letter, he mentions this guy, Tim Urban, and calls him a polymath and says and he writes to you, the you being the Sixers partners, ownership, who live in New York, he's in your backyard. You should have coffee with him. I highly recommend it. So I figured, okay, let me reach out and take Tim the advice and have coffee with Tim Urban. And ends up being virtual coffee because why would people don't talk in real life anymore? I mean, I guess they were foreseeing this current pandemic. I guess
they knew what was coming.
Exactly. We're all just catching up to them. Yep. So it ended up being that, and then the Skype didn't work, so it ended up just being a phone call. So I mean, okay, coffee, cool. And then he's going over his emails with Hinkie, and he discovers that like he had essentially blown off Hinkie. Like Hinkie had emailed him. They did the email tag a few times, and the last one, Hinkie had been like, "I'm going to be in New York on day X. I'll make it worth your while if you can meet up." And this is Tim Urban's reading to me. And then I wrote, "Oh shoot, I never responded back. I feel so bad." And that was the last. And this guy was referenced in his resignation letter, which I found hilarious. So I just thought like, okay, that's my prologue. I nailed that. And then the epilogue, yeah, the same thing. I at the Sloan conference, I kind of run into Hinkie, introduce myself, and have a strange conversation with him, which is not surprising. And like his friend suggests to me I get a vasectomy because I only have 2 kids and he has 3, and so he's gonna add more. Somebody who I didn't know. And then I kind of just like shadow Hinkie, not creepily, but maybe a little more than a normal person would. Anytime I see him, I kind of just like stare across the room or take a few steps closer and I watch him. I'm at a bar with him separately, but at a bar with him on the Saturday night of the Sloan Conference in Boston, and the Sixers game is on TV, and it's just like surreal watching him watch the Sixers.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So when people check out your book, what are some of the big things you want them to think about this entire crazy story?
That's a good question. One of the things I've been saying, because this was enlightening, this is what I learned from it, right? It was illuminating to me, just like I call it like how the NBA works. Like I just found it completely educational and illuminating. And like it's affected how I'm going about my day job, right? How I'm kind of doing background stories if I drop in on things, just trying to get a little more information. Just like the idea of just how much goes on behind the scenes, which people will say like, duh. But I mean, but still, like how much goes on and like all the different players and egos and power and all that stuff that kind of come together to result in what we see on the court. And that's what I learned, right? That was the big thing for me. So and like, you know, if you're a Sixers fan, I think an NBA fan, like I like to think there's some fun stories in there. You know, zany stuff, whatever. But just the idea of just this is how this stuff works, and this is how decisions are made, and like how things are complicated and weird. So that part, and the other part is that these people, even people like who, even if I don't write about them so favorably, right? Like everyone's got backstories and context and like to their lives and things that inform who they are or the things that they do or decisions they make. And again, even the people we don't like, right? It doesn't mean it excuses it, but just helps explain some of the stuff that we see.
Well, it's good to talk about basketball again. Definitely fun to read about
Yeah.
basketball. Why don't you tell everybody where they could check this out, Yaron?
Sure, it's available. You can get it now ebook if you're not going to leave your house. Ebook's good, or delivery, however. So, you know, local bookstores they deliver. Obviously, Amazon as well. But just basically where all books are sold, you can get it. I call it the best way to pass a pandemic. You can add that onto the book. Yeah, no, I think you'll enjoy it. I appreciate everyone checking it out. But yeah, pretty much wherever books are sold.
It's an awesome one. All right, that's Yaron. I'm DJ. See you next time. Turn the sit down.